I grew up in church. I attended a Baptist church with my family and always felt a very close connection with God. Um, I grew up not really knowing my father, and so when the church would talk about God the Father, I just took that right to my heart. And so God's always played a very important role in my life. When I was baptized, I was probably about 12 years old. That's what's the tradition of my church. But soon after that, something happened in my teenage years where I really fell away from the church. And I found myself not attending church and getting into sort of the wrong crowd. And when I turned 18, I really felt like my life was going nowhere. And I was very depressed. And I remembered God. I still believed in God, but I had a lot of struggles. And so I started to kind of pray in my heart that God would help me. And that very same year, my cousin, who is a very close friend of mine, we've always been really close, he reached out to me and said he was going to a missionary school in Ireland with an organization called Youth with a Mission. And he wanted me to go with him. And I just knew that that was sort of an answer to my prayers. I felt very much like I wanted to go, but I didn't know how I would get there. I really wasn't attending church at the time, and I needed a sponsorship. I needed finances to go. I had a friend, and she went to a local church near my house, a very small congregation, and she introduced me to her pastor. And he took one look at me, and he could tell that I was rough around the edges. But I'll never forget that he said he felt on his heart that God had told him to sponsor me. So his church and this pastor signed off on my sponsorship to go to this school. And then through many other avenues and my family making sacrifices, we were able to get the finances for the plane ticket and things like that. You know, the other thing that you need when you're about to go overseas is you have to have a passport. And unfortunately, I had waited a very long time to fill in my application. And the day came, it was the day before I was supposed to get on my plane in D.C. and go overseas. The day before, and my passport had not come in the mail. And so I was very distraught at that time, and I felt like everything that I had been working towards was just not going to happen in the end. And I had really struggled up to that point just to think that this was even possible, even to the point where I remember my cousin and I were talking on the phone, and he told me, don't worry, because God will come through. And he told me, I've seen things happen, and God can work miracles. And I didn't know if I really believed that or not. So the day before I'm supposed to get on my plane, I don't have my passport. And I remember being in my house, and I lived with my grandparents at the time. And it was frantic. We were kind of distraught. And I went into my room, and I closed my door, and I went and got on my knees next to my bed and leaned up against my bed and made the prayer sign, and I just said, God, I don't even know if you're real. I don't know what I believe anymore, but I need help. And I said, God, I'm sure I said something along the lines of, I will change my life if you'll help me. But I pleaded with God. Not 5 minutes later, I'm still on my knees and praying. We get a phone call at the house, and my grandmother picks up the phone, and she runs in and says, the post office just called and said your passport has come in the mail. And in that moment, I just had this amazing realization that God is real. And it was a miracle that I had everything that I needed to get on that plane and to go to this missionary school. What was amazing about the experience is that being at this school really allowed me the opportunity to be around a group of Christians and to get back into my faith And it encouraged me to the point where I definitely felt a change in my heart, and I rededicated my life to God and to Jesus. And I stayed overseas for 6 months as a missionary. I'll never forget one day when I was praying. I was probably about 5 months in on my trip, and I was praying, and I had this vision of being a small child in my church and seeing a pamphlet for mission work overseas and thinking as a small child to myself, I would like to be a missionary one day. And then I felt God speak into my heart and say, you may have forgotten your dream, but I never did. And I just was so grateful that God lifted me up and performed a miracle in my life to help me to get my life back on track and to get back into a relationship with His Son Jesus. A verse that comes to my mind when I think about my testimony and has always stuck with me is Psalms 40. And it says, I put all my hope in the Lord. He leaned down to me. He listened to my cry for help. He lifted me out of the pit of death, out of the mud and filth, and He set my feet on a solid rock. He steadied my legs, and He put a new song in my mouth. I really do feel like God had done that for me, and that's my story.